Good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome to this webinar. The webinar is entitled the Nutrients Action Program, the Farm Impact Tool. Certainly at AgriSearch, we've been asked a number of questions. And just to go through the housekeeping for this evening, you're automatically muted. Please use the Q&A function, not the chat box, for any questions. And if there's a question that you were thinking of and someone else has already put that in, give that a vote. That will go higher up the pecking order for the question to be asked and raised. If you have any issues, and this is from a non-IT person, leaving and rejoining usually fixes them. The webinar will be recorded and on the AgriSearch website for if you want to go back through something that you weren't sure about or wanted to check over. And it is important for us at AgriSearch that you please complete the feedback survey at the end. And the webinar qualifies for those of you who are on this evening and are Dale Farm suppliers. It does qualify as a Dale Farm Future Strong KE event, and that the opt-in will be via the feedback survey. For those of you who aren't sure with regards to AgriSearch, AgriSearch is an independent farm-led levy body. A small levy is taken from the ruminant sector, from beef, sheep and dairying, and that supports a small team to take forward the work within AgriSearch. And the purpose, we are quite clear within AgriSearch, our function, our purpose is to allow the ruminant sector to be more profitable and more sustainable, to be competitive in an ever increasingly demanding market. And there's a strong emphasis on farm research and innovation that farmers can apply. With regards to the NAP specifically, I have to give a lot of credit to Sinclair Main. Sinclair carried out a detailed initial scientific critique of the work that was, or the proposals that were coming forward in the documents. There's been, by Jason and his team, an initial impact analysis using the Beacon Farm Network data to see what is going to impact or how this is going to impact farmers. And there's ongoing analysis around the justification for the lower fertiliser limits. It's important that we engage with stakeholders, and that has happened on a number of occasions. Jason and Sinclair have been speaking to various groups. And sort of culminating in that has been the initial development of the tool that is going to be presented to you this evening. And it's really for you to use on your farm. The results are yours. They're not been shared with anyone else, but it will give you a feel for where you sit on your farm with regards to the P balance. What's the implications? What are some of the options that you want to consider? And it's a long time since I was a student, but I remember being told by Professor Fred Gordon that if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. So it is important that when you're doing this tool or using the tool and using your farm information, that you have as up-to-date and accurate information as possible. And Jason will take you through the steps to complete, and then that will be followed by John Morrow, one of the others in the AgriSearch team. We'll look at a few examples, but they are only examples, they're only averages. You need to do this for your own farm. So I'll hand over to Jason here to take through. We intend that we will be finished inside the hour, so and that's with a Q&A session at the end. So Jason, over to yourself.
Thank you very much, Ian. So just kind of quickly before I start, obviously the NAP, the Nutrients Action Program consultation document, outlines a wide variety of measures. Now, this calculator looks at a certain number of them, the big ticket items in it, not all of them, but there's obviously a fertiliser and feed database mentioned, slurry movement database with all movements to be notified and verified within the 4 days, lowering the limits on fertiliser application, P fertiliser use in grassland only permitted in exceptional cases. A new definition of intensive farms, those above 150 kilograms of organic N per hectare, and note that unlike the other calculations to date and derogations and so on, slurry exports can't be included in those calculations. Also, a banded approach to organic end loading from dairy farms, which means kind of higher end loading for the higher yielding herds. And P balances for all intensive farms. So that's all the farms that are over 150 kilograms of N per hectare, with a 10 kilogram P per hectare limit proposed to be introduced in 2027, and an 8 kilogram of phosphorus hectare surplus limits to be introduced in 2029, which obviously is a very short time frame. So what are the key measures that the calculator looks at? First of all, it works out the organic end loading per hectare, and it uses those new figures for the dairy cows in that. With Surrey exports taken into account, it will look to see, does this farm need to apply for a derogation? Is it above 170 kilograms of N per hectare? And if derogated, is the farm below the upper limit of 250 kilogram of N? So what you might see, for example, for high yielding herds that didn't need a derogation in the past, now need a derogation, and those that were in a derogation maybe find themselves towards the upper end of that. Obviously, then, without Surrey exports taken into account, the determinant of a farm is deemed as intensive, which is above 150 kilograms of N per hectare. And it works out the additional land needed to stay above the 150 kilogram N allowance or below the derogation threshold and upper limit. It also looks at the works out the permitted N application for grassland. So the current N application rates are actually quite simple. There's a one limit for dairy farms of 272 kilograms of N per hectare per year. It's 222 for beef and sheep farms. But there is a whole range of new allowances in the new NAP proposal. I'm not going to go through them in detail now because they're quite complex and they're not really that well explained in the document. But N permitted for silage production could range from 22 for very extensive farms up to 242 for non-derogated farms, depending on the system, and a range of 150 to 210 kilograms of N per hectare for derogated farms for the silage grind. For grazing grind, depending on what you say your grass production is, the N limits would range between 50 and 180 kilograms of N. The calculator assumes the upper limit in each of these because we haven't tried to ask people what grass are growing or what system they're in. We just always assume the calculator defaults to the upper limit for whatever you're on, derogated or underogated. And then the calculator will then compare this to your current fertilizer usage. Then finally, it also then looks at a phosphorus balance per farm. So how do you work out a phosphorus? Well, it's basically phosphorus in and phosphorus out. So your phosphorus in is any livestock that you purchase, any slurry or manure, digestate, etc. that you bring in, any purchased feed, straw, silage, straights, purchased pea fertilizer, etc. And the same then on the outputs. It's obviously livestock sold, any produce sold, be that milk, eggs, wool, crops, and obviously then slurry and manure exports. The calculator then divides this by the area farmed to calculate the phosphorus balance per hectare. And then it will also work out, if required, how many extra hectares of land or what stocking reduction is needed, if any, to achieve the 2027 and 2029 limits of 10 and 8 kilograms of P per hectare, respectively. So what data do you need for the calculator? And as Ian rightly said, it's rubbish in, rubbish out. You want to try and get your data as accurate as possible. So you need your area farmed. So probably the best place to go for that is obviously your annual BPS, single farm payment form, and then a percentage split across grazing, silage, and arable fields. It's not uber critical, but that's really for the fertilizer calculation. And the average number of livestock over the year, and if you want to go on a previous year, if you go into the NIFAS system and look for the nitrate stock count, that will give you, that might take an hour or two to calculate, to come back again and get the results, but that will give you the 5 stock counts of the year and an average for the whole year. So if you want to look at last year as an example, that's a very easy way to go and get it. Slurry, your imports and exports, so that should be expressed in cubic meters. Two numbers and average weights of livestock moving in and out. So the numbers you can again get from the NIFAS portal, it will give you the numbers in and out. Obviously, you then need to kind of determine a weight for those. Details of any purchased feed, straw, fodder, etc. If you happen to have it for your feed and you want to use a different one from the default value, you could ask your milk company for the current phosphorus content of that, but that's an optional extra. Details of any produce sold, so that's litres of milk. eggs, crops, etc. And obviously then your current fertilizer usage, so basically the tons of each category of product and its percentage N, P, and K split. So how do you get the calculator? Well, it's now available and it's in the form of an Excel spreadsheet, and it can be downloaded from the AgriSearch website. And if you got the email an hour before this, will find the link in that email, and anyone who registered in the last hour should also see the link in their registration email. But again, go to the AgriSearch website and click on the lead story, and you'll find it there. The calculator, I say, it's an Excel spreadsheet, and it's comprised of a series of worksheets tabs, which should be completed in sequence. So there's instructions one, there's land stock and slurry, including milk sales, there's livestock in and out, feed and other produce in and out, and fertilizer. And then the final summary sheet shows you the results of that calculation. So the first tab, as I mentioned, is land, stock, and slurry. So the very first thing you enter in is your land. Now, data is entered in the colored cells. Most of them are yellow, except for the slurry. If you see a yellow cell, that means you can enter the data. If it's not yellow, then you don't enter. If it's a clear cell, white cell, just don't touch it. Well, you can't really touch it anyway. They're all locked up, but it's the yellow cells you enter the data into. So enter your land farmed in hectares and then do a percentage split. It's defaulted to 50-50 grazing silage, but you can change that to whatever you want. If you've got arable, put in whatever percentage arable ground you have. There's a total check on the right-hand side just to make sure that you've got that total to 100. It'll say error if that total isn't 100%. Then put in the total litres of milk sold. And the reason we're asking this actually quite quick in the process is that we need that litres and to work out which band your dairy cows are in to know what appropriate N rating to give them. And so on. In that total litres, don't count milk to farm because that's essentially staying on the farm. It's not leaving the farm, so that phosphorus is staying on the farm. So it's literally just the litres that you get on your milk statement. That's all you count in terms of what goes off. Then as you put in your average stock rates, your livestock over the last 12 months. So there's a table here for grazing livestock. And the calculator will calculate the appropriate N rate for dairy cows based on the upper cow because there's no yield in it. It's going for the lowest one of 88. So the N rates for dairy cows go from 88 from below 6,000 meters up to 128 per cow for herds cows over 10,000 meters. And that will change automatically. So it shows the current rates and the proposed N rates, and that will do it. There are also additional tables which I'm not showing here, but there's tables over to the side which you can use for pigs and poultry. Now, it's not a tool really designed for them. If you've got a small pig and poultry enterprise, yes, it should be able to fit in. But obviously, the primary focus of this is for livestock, but we have tried to accommodate pigs and poultry as best we can. Then we come on to slurry. So you enter the cubic meters of slurry imported and exported, and the tons for solid manure. Use the orange cells for imports and the green cells for exports. We also do have rows on down for digestate, but again, for things like that or anything novel that's not listed here, you will need to provide your own N and P levels, which you should have from the analysis. So if you've got a more unusual thing like a digestate or whatever, there are cells on down where you can put in the value of N and P, and it will work it out accordingly. Then livestock in and out, and it's the same table, two identical tables, one for imports and one for exports. We have put in some default weights here. Please change these to whatever is appropriate, depending on the size of your cows, stock. I mean, it's 0 to 1 to, it could be, depending whether you're selling an Angry Angus or a Charolais. Obviously, there could be big differences in this. So please do change the weight, the average weight, to something that's appropriate for the stage that you're either importing or selling the animal out at. Don't get too worried about the ages. Actually, that's not the critical factor. Basically, it's the same rate, 0.66% of the kilograms of phosphorus, no matter what you do. So don't get too hung up on the ages. That doesn't matter. The weights are more important than the ages. You can also include fallen stock because they're actually leaving the farm. They're going off to Literacy or wherever, and so on. But you do not include births as inputs. Feed and other produce. So first point to note is that the p-values in the spreadsheet are not updated. Now, they aren't contained in the NAP document, but talking to our colleagues at NIGTA, I've been again talking to DAERA, The new figures we understand that are going to be used for dairy concentrates based on the evidence they've assembled is 0.47% for dairy cow concentrates and 0.43% for all other ruminant concentrates. That's down from the current default value of 0.55%. So that now takes that into account. But you can change those figures if you have evidence that your particular concentrate is lower than that. You can put in a lower value if you so wish. Also added in silage, straw, silage, straights, and so on. We have also provided blank fields for any not listed. We've put in a couple of feeds which we're talking to some stakeholders we feel should be included. They're not in the default list, but we've just kind of researched the p-value as best we can. And that's barley distillers and calf milk replacer. They're not formally listed in the legislation currently or in the draft legislation, but they are kind of quite two common feeds. But again, if there's any other feeds that you haven't listed there, you can put in that yellow bit towards the bottom. You can put in those bespoke feeds there and provide the p-values. So then the other side of the feed is obviously the sales. Now the sales are copied over from the first sheet, but other produce exports include wool, eggs, if you sell any straw or silage, if you're selling fresh grass as a standing crop, perhaps, potatoes, and obviously forage and arable crops. And again, there are blank fields provided for any produce not listed. And again, you'll need a p-value for those. Then the final table in this you'll have to fill in is your fertiliser use. It's pretty straightforward. And there's a number of rows there. Just put in the total tons of each type of fertiliser. So for handiness, I put in the line for urea and CAN, but you can put whatever in you want. Have not just put how many tons you had of that, and put in the NPK percentage split of that. And then also indicate if some of that was used for arable, then just say, well, 50% was used for grassland, 50% for arable, or if it was all used for arable, let's say some potato crop or whatever, just put in 0 for grassland, and that'll make sure it doesn't get allocated to your grassland calculation. So I'm going to take just a bit of a worked example from the dairy side, and then John is going to go through some beef and sheep analysis. So I'm taking a 150 cow dairy farm. He's on 90 hectares, and we're saying he's roughly a 50-50 split between grazing and silage in terms of his land use. His milk yield from cow is 8,700 litres, and he's doing it off 3.5 tonne of concentrate. So I think we'll all agree it's a very, very efficient system. 38 replacement capacity each year, 25%, counting 24 months. So again, top end, all going really well. He's a couple of breeding bulls. He's selling all his calves, apart from his replacements, strop calves within a few weeks. I'm going to say he's feeding 30 tonne of calf and pepper nuts, 30 tonne of straw, 1.5 tonne of a calf milk replacer. I mean, you can argue those figures. They're blocked out and you can put your own figures in, but that's just the example. We're saying he's sowing 10 tonne of urea, 30 tonne of CAN, and 40 tonne of 23,010 for his silage grind. And that gives him a total end usage of 245 kilogram then, which is reasonable. It's below the total maximum currently of 272. It's decent, but it's certainly by no means excessive. He is probably currently, because he's a higher input farmer, he is currently, let's say, exporting 1,000 meters of cubic meters of 6% cattle starting to stay below the 170 kilogram end limit. So before the new rules apply, this farmer would have an organic N of 167 kilograms of N per hectare per year. So that keeps him out of the derogation. So as I said, the calculator works out the stocking rate, yield, concentrate information. This is not really needed for NAP, but it's just a good kind of sense check. When you're doing the figures, does that look right? Does the milk yield look right? Does stocking rate look right? So on, and the yield, and the concentrate usage, and so on. You can kind of get an idea: is this going fine? It also works out your percentage grassland, because there's a rule: if you want to go for a derogation, you have to have over 80% permanent grassland. In this case, that's not a problem. It's all grassland, so obviously he qualifies. So in terms of his organic loading, so actually straight away we've got an issue. Because of the higher rate, he was previously going through his slurry exports, he was able to stay below the 170, but because he's got high yielding cows, his end loading has gone from that 168 to 191, so he's now in that derogation threshold. He would need 11 hectares to avoid that derogation. a holding N is it's obviously higher. That's the rate for intensive category. It's 220. It's pretty academic at this point. He's well above 150, but that's obviously higher. That shows you the difference between the traditional organic N calculated for derogation and the new holding N, which is calculated for the purposes of are you an intensive farm and so on. So we'd actually need 42 hectares to get them out of the intensive category. So you can kind of see all those figures are worked out for you. If ever you get a minus figure, for example, he's below 250, minus means you don't need any more land, you're fine. Okay, so let's look at the fertiliser. So this farm is derogated because he's above 170. So the maximum N that can be applied to silage ground is 210. So under these new rules, I told you he was 245 kilograms and he was before. So actually, he's now looking at having an over 20% cut in his nitrogen that he can use on that farm. So that gives an indication that this guy's going to have to cut his chemical nitrogen by 20%, by over 20%. Okay, then moving on. Now, obviously, because he's exporting the slurry, he's actually not too bad. He'd be able to meet the derogation and the 2027 and 29 P balances because he's at 6.9. However, and this is where John will talk more about this when we get to the beef and sheep side. As you're well aware, that slurry is typically exported to beef and sheep farms. At present, when you're working out how much slurry, assuming bare ground, you can put to a beef and sheep farm, they're under the 170. You divide by the N rate of 6% cattle. So you could export over 14,000 gallons, 65 meters cubed per hectare. But if that farm goes over 150 kilograms, and as John will show in his beef and sheep examples, it'll not take that much to get those farms over the 150 kilogram thing, then the 8 kilogram P limit applies. And then when you actually work out how to keep within the 8 kilogram P limits, that means you can only put on 15 cubic meters. So we've gone from 65 cubic meters to 15 cubic meters, or in old money, from 14,000 gallons to 3,300 gallons in that. And there's also the danger that given the extra paperwork involved, many beef and sheep farmers might decide they don't really want to take the slurry exports anymore. It could be dangerous. So they just don't want to do that. They want to get into that intensive category and incur all that extra paperwork. So let's say that's the case in this. Actually, he now finds that he hasn't got a willing home for his slurry. So his P balance now increases, and again, this is a very efficient farmer, increases to 12.7 kilograms of P per hectare. So to achieve the 2027 targets, he would either need to have 24 hectares extra land or needs to cut a stocking rate by 21%. To achieve at 8 kilogram, that's the 2029 target, he needs an extra 53 almost hectares of land, or he needs a 37% stocking rate cut. So really, really quite considerable. But I think the thing at the moment is that's a very efficient farm, 24-month calving, everything going swimmingly. What if we stress the system? So what if we, let's say, it's a poor year like 2024 was, and many farmers last year had to feed an extra half ton of meal just because the spring was just so atrocious and the grass quality was not great. Grass check showed that. So he's feeding an extra 500 kilos of meal because his silage quality is not good. He's maybe keeping an extra 10 heifers because he's losing some animals of TB, so he needs a higher replacement rate. And he's keeping, let's say he's not having to keep things through to finishing, but let's say he's keeping these animals for most of their first year of life. And let's say that 24-month calving, he's a bit of a health issue, and his IBR or something, and his 24-month calving slips to 30 months. What happens then? Now, I'll not go through all the figures here, but basically you can see all of a sudden that changes. So all of a sudden he's at 240 organic N. He's actually 1 kilogram away from the upper limit of a derogated farm. He needs a lot more land to apply for derogation. His P balances have gone from 12.7 to 20. The land he needs to get below 10 kilograms has gone from 24.3 to 89.6. Stocking rate cut has gone from the 10, it's gone from 21 to 40, almost 49%. The land needed to get below 8 kilograms has gone from 53 hectares to 134.5 hectares. And the stocking rate cut has gone from 37 to almost 60%. So all of a sudden, you can see if a farm is less efficient or something has gone wrong for whatever reason, and oftentimes that will be completely outside the farmer's control. No farmer asks for disease breakdown or TB or poor weather or whatever else. It happens, and we all know what happens, and we all have bad years. So that's one example of a farm in that kind of 8,500 litre category. But I've kind of put alongside it is a couple of other examples. So starting at the at the lower input side, 7,500 litres from 2 ton. Yeah, listen, that's grand. Because it's the lower input. And remember, the reason we see such a difference here is that your litre milk is kind of 1 and your or 0.1 in phosphorus, and your kilo of meal is 0.47. So there's almost a 5-to-1 ratio between phosphorus and litre milk and a kilo of meal. So that's why it very quickly racks up as you go up the yield bands. So in that system, yes, he's fine or whatever. But even at 7,500 litre system, if we stress it, then all of a sudden when we get to the he's quite close to the 10, and obviously then when we get to the 2029 target, well then he's now shy and he needs an extra 15 plus hectares of land. He's going to have to cut his stock rate by 15%. So that's all of a sudden even he is facing difficulties. Again, I've already talked through the 8750 litres. So I'll not go through them again, but they're just there for comparison. And then finally, that's if we're going towards the top end of the scale. And I know there's farmers even higher than this, but let's say we're doing 10,500 litres from 5 ton. This is what I call the unstressed scenario, the same as all the rest. He's our Q43 organic N. The stock's exactly the same as the 197 and the 220 examples there, but it's just because his cows are now at that 128th category, the top category for N. That puts his organic N right up to 243, even in what we call the unstressed situation. He would need almost 39 hectares to avoid a derogation. His B balance is 21. He would need 104 hectares almost to get by the 10, or a 54% stocking rate cut for the 10. And that only gets worse as we go down to the 8 kilogram P target, 153 hectares, or almost a 63% cut in stock. So that just kind of just shows you the severity racks up quite quickly as you go up the scale. And this reinforces, I suppose, what we showed at the Balmoral show, and these are kind of some of the data sets from our Beacon Farm network, which basically show that really once you cross over that 7,500-8,000 threshold, you really are struggling to get to the 8 and 10 categories. So it's just reinforcing what we showed before on this. And again, these aren't, I am sure there are more challenging situations out there than I have shown in these worked examples. And again, a point to note, as we said at our Balmoral breakfast, is we're talking 8,500 litres are real difficulty. Well, we did a survey of dairy farmers lately. We had over 150 response. And what we learned from that, and I think this will be well backed up by industry, is that 55% of the cows are in herds with 8,500 litre yields or above. So this is going to have a very significant impact on the dairy sector. But that's it for me. I'm now going to hand over to our agriculture manager, John Morrow, who's going to work through a couple of examples on the beef and sheep side.
Thanks, Jason. So I'm just going to run through 2 examples here. The first example is a suckler sheep farm. It's a 100-acre farm. It's 40-60 silage to grazing. He's closed herd. We kept it closed just to simplify things. So there's no purchases. I think we had maybe a bull bought in and 2 rams. He's not particularly heavy stocked, just under around the 1.7 livestock units. He uses about 2,000 gallons of slurry from his neighbour per acre for second or third cut, whatever the situation is. And then he uses 24 tonne of fertiliser that I'll show the breakdown of later. So just some KPIs. You by no means need to put in any KPIs for the spreadsheet. This is just to sort of give you a visual idea of what this farmer is like. So he has 30 suck cows and he finishes about 24 months, 20% replacement rate, and he's selling or retaining 28 cows and feeding 1.3 tonne per cow. So that's your feed to your cow, your feed to your store, feed to your finished animal. Similar with the sheep, he's 100 lowland ewes. His average lamb is finishing in 6 months, say, 25% replacement rating, and he's weaning at 1.5. So overall, 2 good operations, reasonably low stocked, importing a bit of slurry from his neighbour, and slowing sort of an average amount. So this is just to give you an idea of what those numbers actually look like when we input them into the calculator. This is the average livestock units. So I think somebody's asked a question in the chat there of how do we know our average livestock units? If you only keep in cattle for 6 months, you take this off your nitrates report, so it will give you an average, a breakdown. I think it goes every other month, and then it gives you a total into each category. So, for example, it might give you 30 cows. We've used all round numbers for this for handiness, but that just gives you indication of what it looks like in our spreadsheet. So this is just the exports. I didn't include the imports because I said it's a closed herd. Yes, he's buying in a bull and maybe 2 rams, but I didn't think I'd bother with that. You can vary the average weight here in these and the number of animals sold. Again, this is just a breakdown of the feed and fertilizer. You can see there the first column of other ruminants. It's the suckler enterprise, and then the other one is the sheep enterprise. So again, the 60 kilos per ewe is 6 kilograms or 6 ton of meal, and then that's the 1.3 ton per cow multiplied by 30. Oh, that's not quite right. Anyway, 29.4 ton. I think I rounded it to 1.3. Again, the straw, that's just assumption spread across enterprises. This is total farm, so it doesn't have to be enterprise specific. There's a breakdown of the fertilizer. He's going out with half a bag of urea on his grazing ground. He's following maybe with 2 rounds of 27.44, and then he's using 0p on his silage ground. So this just gives you an idea of the summary, and this is what it will spit out to you. You can see the livestock units there. That just gives you an overall idea if you're in the right ballpark. The breakdown of silage ground and grazing ground at the top there. You'll notice here, if you look at the bottom left, he's 138 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. So he's sitting under the 150, so he doesn't need to worry about any P rules. Again, he's sitting at 5.8, so he's well below the P balance requirements of 8. So this farmer is sitting comfortably within the balance, but at the same time, very little details, as Jason showed in the example, maybe close to TB, feeds an extra 200 kilograms to his cattle, could just slip him above that P or nitrogen. So that's really it. Again, our other example, a wee bit of more intensive system, calf to beef system, same acreage, same silage system. He's buying in 80 drop calves. He's again finishing at 24 months average. There's my 1.3 concentrates he's using. I've got those two mixed up. And then he's sowing a wee bit heavier. But you'll notice this farmer isn't importing any slurry from his neighbor just because he's that wee bit higher stocked. And we'll see in the summary how he has little or no opportunity to import slurry without going over that 150. So again, there's the average livestock units. A few cattle are slipping over the 24 months, so there's the 20, and then you can see there the mortality in the calves there and the 1 to 2 year olds. So purchase is really simple in this one. 80 calves bought in. Exports, fairly simple. There's 20 sold over the 2 years, and there's 56 sold under. Again, as Jason said, it doesn't need to be too specific in terms of what age category they go into, because the P rate's the same whether they're over 2 years or under 2 years. And I've included the 4 drop calves that had the mortality in there. So in terms of feed and fertilizer, there's the totals that works back to the 1.3 tons fed per animal, a little bit of straw, and the calf replacer. So 2 calves, 2 bags per calf. I've worked that out of. Again, with the can, the fertilizer, he's using his can as 27.44 and urea for grazing, and then he's using a 0p for silage. Look, you can vary the types of fertilizer. These are just some examples we used. So again, the summary, fairly straightforward. He's at 2.3 livestock units, that wee bit higher stocked. He's a very similar nitrogen rate, just sitting just under the 150. But you'll notice he hasn't imported any slurry, and he probably can only import, I think, 40,000 gallons, which isn't a huge proportion. You know, you're chatting 20 acres worth of silage ground at 2,000 acres, or sorry, 2,000 gallon per acre. So he probably doesn't have much interest in going above that 150, because then he's probably going to have to deal with more paperwork, etc. And he's also just sitting below the 7.5, or sorry, 8 P allowance at 7.5. So importing more slurry is probably just going to tip the balance. And again, feeding extra 100 kilos could tip the balance, or down with TB or any of those external factors. And that's everything. I think we have a few questions in the chat, and we'll answer them first, and I'll hand it back to Jason. Thank you.
I shall hand back to Ian to share the Q&A.
Thanks indeed. I think, John, you touched upon in your presentation, and thank you very much, Jason, to yourself and John for going through that. I know fairly quickly, and there may well be questions, and just can I encourage anyone who wants a bit of clarification, use the Q&A function to do so. But as I say, John, you probably clarified this. If the likes of store animals are only on the farm for 6 months, how are those dealt with within the what number you put in the box for including to do your calculations? All right.
Sorry, can you repeat the question there? Sorry, John, I didn't hear you.
Sorry,
Repeat the
John.
question.
Sorry, Ian,
John,
I had a few technical difficulties here.
no
Could you
trouble.
just repeat the question?
No problem. I say you've probably touched on answering this anyway. Someone was saying there, look, if stock are only on the farm for part of the year, the likes of store cattle, they're only on the farm for 6 of the 12 months. How do I deal with that in inclusion in the calculator?
Yeah, like you can use your nitrates that you can get access from DAERA, or like even if you want to just go as simple as just break it down every other month, so take an average there. Look, this is just to give you a rough guide of where you stand. You know, you could do as simple as 10 cattle for the first 6 months, and no cattle for the next 6 months. So it'd be 5 cattle overall. So it's as simple as that, or you can get the accurate data from DAERA, but obviously you can't predict the future in terms of average livestock units, and that's where the challenge becomes in this. So this is where something like a calculator and just sitting down and working out average livestock units month by month, it's tricky, but that's the only way to really go about it, to predict the future. But in terms of going in past years, you can access that from DAERA.
Yep, thanks indeed, John. Question there also, someone that has arable on the farm, 50/50 arable grassland. Are they still governed by Nutrients Action Program, Jason?
Yeah, basically the short answer is yes. You are governed by the NAP. Obviously, there are certain things only kick in once you get to 150 kilograms of N per hectare. So if, because you're 50% arable, you're below 150, you might have to worry so much about the phosphorus balance. So the reality is you've got arable, phosphorus balance probably isn't a problem anyway. But yes, everyone has to maintain it regardless of which system you're in.
Yep. Remember, basically arable ground has 0 nitrate on it, so that gives you an available hectare for use within the farm situation. John, similar sort of question to yourself. If I'm a sheep farmer, no slurry used on the farm, they're either minimal housing or maybe just housed for a few weeks at lambing time or during lambing, do I need to complete, or will I need to complete a Nutrients Action Program or be concerned?
I don't think you probably need to be concerned. I think you'll be well under the 150 units likely of nitrogen, and you'll be well under the 8 units. I assume you would need to put your own numbers in to find out. The NAP is everybody in agriculture and within Northern Ireland, so it doesn't matter if you have 1 sheep or 1,000 sheep or 1 cow or 1,000 cows. It still all applies to you. So you should be okay under that circumstance, but just put the numbers in yourself and find out.
Yeah. Jason, there's a question here, and I think we'll not be in a position to be able to answer it. Remember, this is consultation. It would have been great if there'd been more consultation prior to the launch of the Nitrates Action Program. But question here on the penalties, and certainly there's a number of people interested in this. Any indication on what the level of penalty will be?
Okay, so there are two systems in this. So and there's actually there's three. Well, there's two current, and then there's the potential third one being mentioned in the consultation document. So currently, if you breach your the current Nutrients Action Program and you are a farmer who claims BPS, you can have a percentage of your BPS, your single farm payment, docked effectively. And that already happens. There's various percentages depending on the gravity of the theme. I'm not familiar with them. Obviously, outside of that, this is still the law of the land. So they can also then take you to court. Now, obviously, it's a much higher burden of proof in a court, but they can still take you to court. And there are, and I can't remember, but yes, there's fines and potentially even imprisonment to the guy who's been taken to prison. But there are fines and so on that could be imposed in a court. What the third option that is being proposed in this consultation document is a fixed penalty scheme. So a bit like if you get caught speeding going down the road, you can just get £120 fine and 3 points. So there's no points for this, but they are talking about a fixed penalty scheme where it's just a docket handed to you. Now they're not proposing to bring that in right away, but the consultation document is discussing using legislation down the line to bring that in. So this will be the law of the land. So, some people farmers just say, well, I'll just sell my entitlements, and that they can still get you into court. So I think they're higher burden of proof. They can still get you there. And they are also considering bringing in some kind of fixed penalty on the spot fine system. Now that will require primary legislation, but that is one of the proposals contained in the document.
Yeah, you've probably answered another question that a number of folks were interested in knowing. If you give up your single farm payment, do you still need to be compliant? And you've touched on that. A question here, John, to yourself. How could this affect someone with 25 suckler cows selling the calves basically at 8 months of age and only sowing 5 or 6 ton of fertiliser on 80 acres?
Yeah, that sounds like an even more extensive system than we looked at. It's a similar stocking rate, but I would assume with the fact that you're not keeping as many 1 to 2 year olds or finishing any animals, you're feeding a lot less meal, you've got lower average livestock numbers, and you're certainly sowing a quarter of our worked example there in the suckler cows and sheep. So, and you don't have any sheep, so you're probably well down below the 150. But again, just put it in yourself to find out.
Yep. And I think that is John, the beauty of the calculator. It's you can take your time to do it with your own information and your own data and see what it says for your farm and make a judgment call from there. And I think there's probably a number of people who would have said in the past, derogation, over 170, I've done a calculation in this and I'm nowhere near it. I think Jason emphasized as well where you're importing slurry, and that has been common practice, whether it be slurry from another ruminant livestock farmer or taking on poultry litter or pig slurry, then that has implications for your own farm or potentially implications for your own farm. Jason, probably for yourself, does the change in the nitrogen banding for dairy cows and the milk yield have an impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're currently under the current nitrogen banding, all cows are 100 kilograms of N per year, no matter whether that cow is a little Jersey doing 5,500 litres or a big Holstein doing 13,000 litres, makes no difference, it's 100. There's about, there's umpteen different bands in this new one. And so it goes from, if you're around, I can't remember exactly where it is, roughly 100 is roughly a 7,500 litre cow in this current system. If you're around 7.5 to 8, that will change. If you're a lower yielding farm, if you're below 6,000, you'll actually go down to 88 kilograms. But on the other hand, if you're a guy who's producing over 10,000 litres a cow, you're going from 100 to 28. So that is in effect really almost a 28% stocking rate cut straight away. Or it's increasing your end limits and giving your end limits your required factor. It's almost a 28% stocking rate cut, even ignoring the phosphorus balance start away. So yes, that does have a significant effect. Unlike the south, there's many more bands. I think there's about 12. They change every 500 litres from 6,000 litres to right up to 10,000. There's a lot of bands in there. But yes, there is. Yes, it does have quite a dramatic impact.
Yeah. And following on the dairy sector, to achieve NAP target across the dairy sector, have you any estimation of the number of litres less production that is required?
I don't. I mean, I think that is a figure that we would like to get, and when we're working across the sectors to try and do that proper analysis, I could hazard a guess, but I think it would be very rough, and I would rather not, come up with something. But you've seen some of the figures there as to what could be required. Certainly, the majority of the high yielding herds, and they are where most of the cows are, will be affected. So yes, this could have a very significant impact, but I would like to do some more detailed modeling before I put my name to a real figure as such. But
Yeah.
let's just say very significant, and then you start to get into questions of, well, are the dairies still viable and everything else? And are farms viable? You can say a farm will take a 30% stocking rate cut, but actually does that farm then become completely unviable given his existing financing commitments and everything else? So I mean, you can say 20-30%, at a point the whole thing just becomes completely unviable. So there's a lot of thought you need to put into that before you really give an answer to that kind of question.
Yeah. I think this will be a relatively simple one to answer, Jason. But again, it's on the dairying side. Does every litre of milk contain the same level of P, i.e., does high milk solid have the same as milk with a lower butterfat and protein content?
Well, on the paper, it does. I think the person's asking a very valid question, and I've been posing that. And actually, I know some of the milk companies have been talking to me about that. And actually, Sinclair at the moment is doing a bit of desktop research for me on that, and perhaps it might be worth considering getting a few samples of different constituent qualities. Now, I know from the initial work Sinclair's done, he says it's actually it varies quite a lot depending on the casein content of the milk. So I think it's something we're going to have a look at, because obviously, yes, there has been a significant improvement in fat and protein in recent years. That 0.1% figure has been about for a long time. So I think it's well worth having a good look and seeing if it couldn't be higher, because if that goes up even a small amount, that will make a huge difference to your P balance.
John, question for yourself here. The organic N calculator automatically change if you have breeding ewes that are in around the 80 kilos live weight rather than the 110. Equally, are all ewes counted as 0.1 of a livestock unit regardless?
So the actual weight wouldn't affect the nitrogen. They have just used a standard rate, so it's just based on your livestock average livestock units or numbers, and then yes, they have used 0.1 as a size of ewe. Look, the ewes don't seem to have a huge implications in terms of nitrates. You have to be extremely high stocked, probably unrealistically high stocked in terms of a lowland sheep production system. So it's probably nothing to worry about at the moment. Where the weight difference varies would be on our P balance. So if for example, you are selling ewes at, you're buying in ewes at 60 kilos and you were selling them at 50 kilos, that would have an impact on your P balance, but it wouldn't have any impact on your N balance.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, folks, it's great to see the number of questions coming in, and certainly there's a number are posing the question around what are the what's the economic impact in Northern Ireland, and that's something that we within AgriSearch have really been pushing DAERA hard on. There's significant discussion within the consultation document on the environment and all the impacts that are having. The actual economic assessment or impact needs, we consider, significantly more work. If you are looking at stock reduction numbers in Northern Ireland, that will have major consequences, not just simply for the processing of beef or lamb or milk, but the whole supply chain and all the ancillary sector based around that. So huge economic consequences if Northern Ireland was forced into a situation where there was significant destocking. So hard to quantify because we haven't all the details, but we certainly within AgriSearch have gone back and said that's one of the important areas that DAERA need to come forward and provide more information on. Because there's a question there, has there been an impact study on the poultry sector? I'd say there's a number of pieces of work going on to try to get there. There was a question with regards to the definition of grassland or grassland farm. Jason, is it?
Yeah, well, so I think I saw someone in the questions there say, "Oh, it's only grassland farms affected by NAP who are above the 80% grassland." That's not true. To be a derogated farm, which is a subclass of regulations within NAP, NAP still applies to everyone. But currently, if you want a farm of 170, and that would still be the case in the next series, you have to go for a derogation. But to be a derogated farmer, you have to have 80% of your farm has to be in grassland. But it's not true that if you're 50-50 grass and cereals, NAP doesn't apply to you. It's probably going to have less of an impact on you because your P balance is going to be fine, or you could still be hit by your end limits on your grassland and so on, because they will change. But it's not the case. NAP will apply to everyone regardless of what their split of grass or arable.
A question there. Is there scope to reduce P balance by use of lower P feed materials?
I suppose, yeah, I mean, again, I'm not an expert in this, but I know talking to Conrad Ferris here at AFBI, as you saw earlier, there has already been a significant reduction. To be fair, the grain trade have done a very good job over the last few years, and we have gone down from 0.55 to 0.47 for dairy rations, 0.43 for others. And I know talking to Conrad Ferris here at AFBI, that really, without looking at very much precision feeding, where you're testing your forages regularly for phosphorus, there's very little room to go a whole lot further down on that. We've taken the easy road. Not to say you couldn't do a bit more, but it would have to be very measured, have to be very precise, because you could easily get yourself into issues if you didn't tread very carefully on that. So there's relatively limited scope to take P down further in feed.
Yeah. Probably John or Jason looking for a bit of clarification here. Someone has put in, when do you suggest a farmer complete this calculation? Will farmers be able to complete this calculation? On penalties, NAA will breach you if calculations are not correct. Basically, they're forcing honest people to, I'll use the word fudge the details. But with regards to this calculator, this is for you for use on your farm. This isn't going to NIE or any other person. But when do you suggest a farmer complete the calculation, Jason or John?
Well, this tool is just to help you to show, first of all, what would be the impact of my farm. And obviously at the moment it's a proposal. We hope the proposals will change, but this is to help guide you as to what would the effect be on your farm. In terms of the paperwork and so on, what you have to remember is under the proposals, they say have them written, they will be able to work out your P balance without actually getting a whole lot of information for you, because on the proposals, they will have a feed and fertiliser register. So they'll know the feed and fertiliser you have brought onto the farm from NIFAS and so on, the number of stock you have in the farm, and stock in and stock out in line to weights, but they could do an approximation. And they know your land area for that. So to be honest with you, they will be able to do a pretty rough figure. I think the way they're talking about this in the consultation document is actually, and because of the slurry exports and imports verified in 4 days, they'll actually be able to do the paperwork almost for you without going anywhere near you in the future. So, I mean, let's be clear, this is not an NIA compliance tool. This is a calculation to show you how, this is not like the derogation account the fertilization account you do if you're a derogated farmer. This is simply for you to work out if these rules were put in place as they are currently proposed, obviously it's just the proposals at the moment, what would be the impact? So it's just so you can say, well, that impact on me would be I'd have to stop my cotton rate, or I would have to sow less fertilizer, or whatever else it might have to be. But it's just there to guide you. What would this mean for my farm? Obviously, we hope these proposals will change, but that's all this is. It's not designed as a future compliance tool or anything like that. Not at all.
Yeah.
It's simply there to calculate what the
Again, just
impact
a
is.
bit of clarification here. There's a number of people have supported the question. I mean, AgriSearch left a very small levy from beef, lamb, and dairy. But the question is, on the poultry side, that poultry is high in P content, and that's coming on to farm. Why we're not taking account, John, it is through the importation.
Yeah, and there's a calculator also there where you can input a typical dairy system, or sorry, poultry system, whether it be layers or broilers, and similar with pigs, just to model that to get an idea. Because I know there's mixed farms out there with sheep, dairy, poultry, pigs. So look, this is an issue for every sector, whether you're pigs or poultry or ruminants, and a lot of those enterprises are mixed on farms.
Folks, thank you very much indeed for your participation. I said things would draw to a close coming up on 9 o'clock. There's a raft of questions, and we'll put reply back to those, so we will. But I do want to say a big thank you to Jason and John. There was a lot of work going on, or has gone on behind the scenes with their staff to get this calculator in place. We certainly were asked by the industry, could we have something there to give a better than an indication, give information to farmers that they could make a call or a judgment on their own farm. So very much thanks to Jason and John. What are the next steps for ourselves within AgriSearch? We're continuing to work with our industry partners, and we do want your feedback. When you do put your figures through, was the calculations where you thought they were going to be? Were there any issues that arose? So please provide us with the feedback, but we're also going to work with our industry partners to get examples, and that will take account of those people who have a farm and there's large poultry enterprise on it, whether that be broilers or layers, or people who are importing a lot of either poultry litter or pig slurry. So those will be taken. As I've said before, there is a need for a much wider economic impact assessment. If the proposals went through and became law, there are big implications for the Northern Ireland agri-food industry, and the economic impact needs to be quantified. We do need your support, and we do need your participation. We were actually involved with a meeting earlier on there today, or a fair bit of the afternoon, and we will need information on case studies to highlight what is the impact for different farmers and different farming situations. Everything will be anonymous, but we do need your help. Again, emphasize the importance of filling in the feedback form, emphasizing again that this is a qualifying event for the Dale Farm Future Strong KE event, and your opt-in to do the survey get you that accreditation. This won't be the end. We propose to do a piece on the science with regards to some of the issues that this consultation, and I can't say strongly enough how the support from Dr. Sinclair-Main has been in allowing AgriSearch to present information at the Balmoral breakfast, but also on an ongoing basis, the information that needs to get out to farmers on the issues that have to be addressed. So can I, on behalf of AgriSearch, say a big thank you to your participation. There were a significant number of folks on, and again to Jason and John, many thanks for all the work and your teams behind the scenes. Thank you.